Teacher Talking Sports, what does, what do, how we live. And let's continue the NFL Mount Rushmore series I've been doing, where I name who I believe are the four best players in each decade. Started with the 2010s. I am now on the 1980s. So let's take a look at the four I chose, and I'll get more into what they did during the decade as the video goes along. But in alphabetical order by last name, I included Ronnie Lott, Joe Montana, Anthony Munoz, and Lawrence Taylor. And there was some notable omissions. I think the toughest guy to leave off was Dan Marino, whose career started in 1983. So that's part of the reason why he wasn't included. That season he played about half the year. But, nonetheless, his 1984 is, in my eyes, probably the best season ever by a quarterback, especially when accounting for era. But some other honorable mentions include Eric Dickerson, Mike Singletary, Steve Largent, Walter Payton, Reggie White, to name a few. John L. White probably as well, although like Marino, he didn't play the entire decade. So let's take a look at the four I chose. So again, alphabetical order by last name, we got Ronnie Lott, who was the eighth overall pick in the 1981 NFL Draft. So played 9 seasons in the decade from 81 to 89 with the 49ers for the decade. Started 115 games, picked off 48 passes, returned 5 of them for touchdowns, forced 8 fumbles, and accumulated 5.5 sacks. Obviously, from a defensive back position, that wasn't his main thing. But yes, many see him as the best safety of all time, although he started his career as a cornerback. About the first half of the decade was a cornerback, second half as safety. 4 times, Lott was named a first team All Pro. He also a Defensive Player of the Year, finishes of 6th and 13th. His rookie year finished 6th in MVP voting. Pretty incredible. But yes, in 1986, led the league with 10 interceptions. Was an interception machine, really. Also had a season with 7, 6, 3 seasons with 5, 2 seasons with 4, and 1 with 2. So every season in the decade had multiple interceptions. In a shortened 1982 season, led the league in total tackles. Was named to the Pro Bowl 8 of the 9 seasons in the decade. Known as one of the hardest hitters of his time, really, at the defensive back position in general. We've heard stories of how tough he is, about how he sacrificed a finger to play in a game, but also won 4 Super Bowls with the 49ers in the decade and played a total of 17 games in the postseason in the decade, intercepting 8 passes, returning 2 of them for touchdowns. There's a reason Ronnie Lott is considered one of the best defensive backs of all time. He's on my 1980s Mount Rushmore. Next, Joe Cool. I'm talking about Joe Montana, the 82nd overall pick in the 1979 NFL Draft. But from 1980 to 1989, played with the 49ers, so all 10 seasons. In the decade, Montana went 86 and 37 as a starter with a 63.9 completion percentage, 30,958 yards, 215 touchdowns, 107 interceptions, a 94 rating, which, those are awesome numbers, especially for his era, which, wasn't as pass happy. Rules weren't as pass friendly for quarterbacks as they are today. Montana was named the league's MVP in 1989. Also had MVP finishes of 2nd, 3rd, 5th, and 6th. Was Offensive Player of the Year in 1989. Also had Offensive Player of the Year finishes of 2nd, 3rd, and 5th in the decade. 5 times in the decade, he led the league in completion percentage, including 70.2% in 1989. Led the league in touchdown passes twice for the decade. Led the league in rating twice for the decade. Had 3 seasons with over a 100 rating, again for his era. That was quite the stellar rating. Numerous fourth quarter comebacks, and just like Ronnie Lott, was a stalwart in the postseason for the decade. Also a member of all four Super Bowl winning teams in the 80s. Montana for the decade went 13 and 4 with the playoffs, 36 touchdowns, 16 interceptions, a 97.5 rating. Also winning three Super Bowl MVPs in the 4 years. Joe Montana, the second member of my 1980s Mount Rushmore. Next, I gotta show offensive lineman love. I hadn't included one yet, but Anthony Munoz, some consider him the best offensive lineman of all time. So Munoz was selected with the third overall pick in the 1980 NFL draft. Played the whole 10 years with the Cincinnati Bengals, and in those 10 seasons, he started every game he played. So that was let me see, from hold on. Started every game. I'll get back to it. At left tackle, of course, the premier offensive line position, and man, accolades galore from Anthony Munoz. He was a first team All Pro in 8 of the 10 seasons. So, um, not only his rookie year and 1984, when he was a second team All Pro, was Munoz not a first team All Pro. Was named to the Pro Bowl each of the last 9 seasons of the decade. The Athletic, a few years back, actually named their best players in NFL history. They included Anthony Munoz as the 12th best player in NFL history, and most of his damage was done in the 1980s, as he played 3 seasons after that, again with the Bengals from 1990 to 1992. But, just an incredible career. Actually, didn't start one game in the decade, and I don't know what's going on with my Pro Football Reference, but anyhow, he played in 148 games, starting 147. Uh, Excellent blocker for both first Ken Anderson and then Boomer Esiason. The Bengals reached 2 Super Bowls in the decade. Unfortunately, they weren't able to win either one. But there's a reason that Anthony Munoz is, if not considered the best offensive lineman of all time, at least on the Mount Rushmore of offensive linemen. First ballot Hall of Famer in 1998. My third member of the 1980s Mount Rushmore. And let's end with maybe the best defensive player of all time. Some might consider him that. That is LT Lawrence Taylor, the second overall pick in the 1981 NFL Draft. So played 9 seasons in the decade, all with the New York Football Giants. In that time, 129 games, 126 starts, 113 and a half sacks, 8 interceptions. In that time, was a first team All Pro in 8 of the 9 seasons. In the one season he was second team All Pro. Only two defensive players in NFL history have won the MVP. Lawrence Taylor is the most recent one. He won in 1986. 3 times was Defensive Player of the Year, including his rookie year of 1981 when he was Defensive Rookie of the Year. Also a Defensive Player of the Year, finishes the second, fourth, and sixth. LT sacked the quarterback 20 and a half times in the 1986 season. Each of his last 6 seasons in the decade had double-digit sacks, no less than 11 and a half. Also won a Super Bowl in 1986 with the team. Lawrence Taylor, there's a reason he's considered one of the scariest guys for opposing quarterbacks. Was just such a terror as a defensive player, not only in the passing game, but the running game as well. I mean, Pro Football Reference has something called approximate value, and he had at least a 13 each season. Basically, anything over 10 is good. Lawrence Taylor is a reason he's considered one of the greats, fourth member of my 1980s Mount Rushmore. So there you have it. So hard to leave off Marino, but again, he didn't play the whole decade. Uh, Let me know in the comments. Do you agree, disagree with the four I chose? Not an easy endeavor, as I've stated in earlier videos, because I did set for MLB as well. MLB certainly seemed a lot easier, but stay tuned for tomorrow. I'll be doing the 1970s. Anyhow, don't forget to subscribe. Tell a friend, tell a friend, tell a friend to subscribe. Like the video, share the video, hit the bell for notifications about